Meanwhile, we're watching a stand-your-ground hearing in the state of Florida for Gerald Radford. He's accused of second-degree murder for the death of John Walt Lay. The defendant claims he shot the victim in self-defense at a Tampa dog park back in February. Prosecution disputes Radford's story and say the defendant harassed Lay for months, yelling homophobic slurs at him. And the day before the shooting, Lay posted a video on social media saying Radford threatened him at that dog park. Then he ended up dead the next day. Let's go back into court. More direct examination from the medical examiner in this case. Kelly Devers, watch closely as she details how she believes the trajectory of the bullet negates the defense theory that the defendant was on the bottom in this struggle.
Here is State's Exhibit 3AA. And what is this?
This is the projectile that I recovered from his lower back.
All right, and so
right near his buttocks area.
And I'm going to go back to State's 3Z. And the time that 3Z is taken, is this gentleman, has this cavity been opened? Has the skin been cut?
No, and you can't really see that area because it's below.
Okay, well, that's what I'm trying to get. In terms of reference, here
Correct.
when we're looking at 3Z, there are these marks to the left of the picture.
Yes.
Actually, the right of the picture. I'm
Left,
so sorry.
yeah.
I keep saying left, but it's right of the
Well,
picture.
it's the right side of the picture.
Right, yeah. Right side of the picture. Is this area here where the body is then cut open and this brass object is found, is this lower on the body than those marks we see on the right side of 3Z?
Yes, and you can actually see one of the abrasions higher up near the arm.
Is that kind of up here by the finger?
No, not there, but up higher near his arm pit area.
Oh, yes, up here.
And then I think my hand is over the other abrasions.
I see, okay. Did you withdraw whatever this object is?
Yes,
And what was it?
it was a projectile.
Is that what is depicted here in State's Exhibit 3AB?
Yes,
This appears to be a bullet, basically.
yes.
Were you able to determine if that bullet that was recovered from, I want to make sure I get this right, is this the left lower back?
Yes.
That bullet that was recovered from the left lower back, is it attached to the wound that is on the right upper part of the body, like near the clavicle?
Yes.
You were able to follow that path?
Yes.
I also want to talk about State's Exhibit 3AC. What are we looking at here?
These are his knees, and we're looking at multiple abrasions on the knees.
All right, and here's State's AD and AE. Are these just close-up photos
Yes.
of those same abrasions?
Yes, they're close-ups.
Can you tell us anything about how these abrasions are caused? What was happening? What caused them? Anything like that?
No.
Is this consistent with a person who might have had their knees exposed, meaning they don't have pants over it? Maybe they're wearing shorts or not wearing pants at all.
Yes.
And their knees come into contact with the ground, for example?
Yes.
Doctor, I want to talk about the trajectory of the wound path. Can you give me a description of it in terms of like front, back, up, down, left, right, whatever the case may be?
Yes.
Okay, tell me about that.
It's front to back, right to left, and sharply downward.
And when you're saying right to left, is that the standard anatomical position?
Correct.
So it's as if I was standing like this, sort of, and you're looking at me.
Yes.
Okay, and so right to left.
Yes.
And how would you describe the angle? Is it would you call it steep?
Steep. Sharply downward.
Sharply downward. And then front to back.
Correct.
Can you tell anything about the positioning of the body at the time he shot? Can you say, oh, he was definitely laying in bed, he was definitely sitting in a car, he was definitely jogging, anything like that?
The only thing I can say is the position of the muzzle of the gun.
And what would you say about the position of the muzzle to the gun?
It had to correspond with that trajectory.
And so I have a prop gun here. Could you demonstrate for her honor the general positioning of the firearm as you would have expected at the moment the firearm would have been discharged?
In some fashion, it would have to be in any of this plane, but it has to be pointing like this to get to the lower back, way down here. So it's got to be a sharp angle, just like this. So you can twirl it around, but it has to be firing in this direction.
All right. And so you can hold
almost perpendicular to your neckline.
Yeah, because it goes right below the collarbone.
Right.
So it's right here, and the bullet has to go through me to my back and all the organs in between.
All right, so doctor, I noticed that you brought a prop with you today.
Yes.
And I have a smaller one if it makes it easier, but I want you to try and help me simulate a variety of scenarios and tell me what you would opine based on that. Or you want me to get this guy or you want my little one?
It's probably more accurate to have something more life-size.
Okay. And Judge, if she could step down, I think it would probably be easier.
All right.
So I will basically just balance this thing or hold it however you like.
Oh, you need this.
Now, if we were standing up at the time of the shooting, and for ease of description, I'll have you be the defendant,
Okay.
the person who is shooting,
Okay.
because you can manipulate the gun.
Okay.
And then this will represent the deceased,
Uh-huh.
the prop here, the demonstrative. Can you tell me how you expect a person would generally be configured if they were discharging this gun into this person, assuming they're roughly the same height?
You mean how would the gun be?
Yes.
So the gun would be in this, something like this. So you'd have to be holding it in some manner so that you could reach the trigger. And that would have to be at this angle because it's got to go to the back on the left side.
And I noticed that you are right-handed, and for purpose of all of this, I want you just to assume that the person who's shooting the gun is right-handed.
Okay.
I noticed that you have, for purposes of the record, you have sort of raised your elbow up almost sort of to like neck height, and then had to take your arm all the way sort of across the center line of your body to accomplish that shot.
Yes.
Is that a fairly odd positioning for a shooting?
It's kind of awkward, but that would be the way it would have to be if I'm holding it.
Okay. Well, what if I was to tell you that instead, you, the shooter, were laying on the ground, roughly with your back against the ground,
Okay.
and then instead this person, the deceased, was somehow on top of you? I want to first, if I can borrow my little one, because it makes it a little easier. He's not going to rest there. Would I be correct if I was to use my pen as to sort of poke through the body here? The shot has to go something like that.
And even steeper because it ends up down here.
Okay, well, I can't make it that steep, but it has to go something like that.
Yes.
So if a person is, for example, kneeling on top of another person, right? So the person's laying on the ground here, and the person, there's another person on top of him. Can we agree that it would be impossible for the person on top to basically be straight up and down their torso and be shot in that position?
It would be very hard if they were sitting like that.
I mean, the guy on the
You
ground,
could do it.
the guy on the ground would have to get his arm all the way
It would
up
have
here.
to be way up here in some fashion and be able to pull the trigger.
Now does it become a bit easier if the person on top starts to lean over more and more and more, thereby closing the distance?
Yes, then it's more reachable.
But even if the person is on the ground, and this person, you still have to be able to establish an angle that steep.
Yeah,
So even if I go sort of maybe 45 degrees,
it's still really hard. I mean, you have to do something like this to do it.
okay.
And you're just, when you say like this, you're putting your
I mean,
full-
something, this really awkward position to get it in that fashion.
Now I want you to
About
assume,
you're talking about your arm being completely like over your head.
Yeah, to get it so that you can shoot it.
now I want you to assume one more fact. I want you to assume that the guy on top, the demonstrative here, has both hands on the gun, because we could agree that normally the positioning of the deceased is fluid and could be changing.
Right.
And he could, for example, roll his right shoulder forward more or his left shoulder forward more, and that would change potentially his exposure to the guy with the gun.
And he's sitting on me?
Right, still sitting on you. Once the hands are sort of locked in, if the deceased hands are on the gun, and the shooter has obviously at least one hand on the gun to fire the gun,
Right.
is there really a lot of room for the person on top to twist their body to in any way make this an easier shot?
No, because you're kind of locked in with your pelvis, and you can only move so far to the right or the left.
So if I was to suggest to you that the shooter in this case is on the ground, effectively on his back, has has the gun in his right hand, has his finger on the trigger, has the person he's shooting on top of him, kneeling on him, at whatever angle, would you still say it's a very hard angle for a person to achieve and to accomplish given the trajectory of this particular wound path?
Yeah, it's still hard to make that happen.
If I was to suggest to you in any way, shape, or form that the deceased also had their finger in the trigger guard, does that make it even harder to accomplish? Like you got to get another finger in here somehow.
Yeah, because there's not much room there.
I'm sorry?
It's hard to get two fingers. But you could,
Doctor, if instead I was to suggest to you one of the two scenarios, one is that, one is that the deceased is somehow in a lower position, maybe even kneeling, and the shooter is at a higher position and is now firing down. Would that be consistent?
that would be easier to do.
And would it be consistent with the wound path?
It would
If I
be
was
consistent with the, because you'd have the angle more easily available.
What if I was to suggest to you this scenario? What if the deceased is effectively back to chest to the shooter, and now the shooter is reaching around and shooting him with the right hand? Would that be a fairly easy position to accomplish?
That's doable.
And that could that be also because the deceased and the shooter are both standing, or, for example, they're both on the ground rolling around?
Sure.
Do those two scenarios, either the shooter being higher than, for example, a kneeling victim, or the shooter being behind the victim and reaching around to shoot him, do those seem easier angles or easier shots to accomplish than this sort of twisting across the center line?
Yes.